Okay, so when I talk about being a hero, I'm not talking about some comic book Boy Scout. I'm talking about the hero I needed as a kid. Someone who's willing to stand up for my rights no matter what. And that's who I am. If I gotta do a bunch of crazy shit to draw attention to this issue, then so be it. It's worth the time. We have the technology. Well, first of all, we have the food to end world hunger within a year. That's not a joke. We have the technology to get it where it needs to go. We have the technology today, not 20 years in the future. We have the technology today to sustain us during another ice age. I mean, we have that technology today. The thing is, we need to think about the children first. Everybody does. The things that have happened to me, the things that happened to Natalie, and quite honestly, a lot of the people that are angry with me for telling their stories, they're things that still happen today. You say don't live in the past. Those things that happened in the past have long-lasting repercussions. What people think, people think. Those two words don't exactly fit together. The larger the group, the dumber they get. That's not always true. We live in a world that we can change. We can make the entire world self-sustainable. Even the Sahara within 10 years. I mean, we really have a lot of technology at our disposal and a lot of manpower too. For human power, I should say. I don't want to exclude women. Humans. We're all humans. It don't matter what color your skin is, what your gender is, or what your sexual preference is. You are a human being, first and foremost. And it's not my place to play God. Why would I want to do such an offensive thing? And I do find it offensive. But I also believe under certain circumstances that we need to stop wasting our money on destroying this planet with weapons and destroying people with weapons. Firebombs? Oh my god, those are gross. That's a mean thing to do to a doctor. And in some places, that's normal. We have the ability to end war within 10 years. We just need to start off the revolution. And I'm not talking about a revolution by killing. I'm talking about a revolution by total humanitarian, for lack of a better word, I'd say dictatorship. Not run by one person, but run by everybody. And I know what you're thinking about communism. No, what I'm talking about is that we live in a place that's highly industrialized. That's not the people of the rest of the world's fault. You want to talk about money? We got the money to do it. I mean, hell, we could get rid of half our military. And we would literally have enough to do it. That's if the government did it, and they're not going to, but you can. See, a lot of these things that people take for granted, a lot of things that they buy at the store, there's art that's being lost, and that's the art of restoring things, fixing things. If you can't buy a new part, you're screwed most of the time, aren't you? What I'm not understanding is why we have so much red tape, so many roadblocks in the way of doing the right thing, so many excuses for punishing the innocent. We try to take their stupidity of youth to get them to go shoot people elsewhere, and sometimes they die. We don't need that. And a lot of people talk about overpopulation, but well managed, the entire population of the world could fit in Alaska in a very small area, believe it or not. We also have the technology to renew our natural resources indefinitely. And it's not a difficult switchover. We already have the technology, and that's the point of all of this, is that we need to think about the kids, regardless of what's legal and what's not. The kids need to come first. But it needs to not just be your kids that's selfish. Because when it happens to you, you don't want people treating you like that, do you? Of course you don't. These are your fucking kids. Somebody's got to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, even if it's not popular. Even if it doesn't get you likes on Facebook. And the more people try to turn away from it, the more they look elsewhere, the more they see it. All over the news. All over the news. Child Protective Services all over the news, both here and in Canada. The FBI all over the news. Child molesters all over the news. Y'all talk loud trash when those things are used on the big people, or when big people pretend. But in the case of a very recent offender, we got a lot of news saying that the government killed that Mr. Epstein. I don't know what happened there. I wasn't there. What I've been trying to do for the last 30 years is tell on the exact kind of stuff that they were hoping Epstein would come out with. But not just that. I mean, it's not on a high-class jet plane, so it's not worth their report, is it? We can do something about all this stuff. We really can. We need to learn to see the humanity in others. One thing that's an art lost on Americans is putting your feet in the other shoes. Put your feet in the shoes of a Muslim or someone from Iraq or Saudi Arabia, Russia. You try to do that? Alright, well that's not important to you because they're not here, right? What about your neighbor? What about your neighbor with all their weirdo stuff that you're always talking about to everybody else? Whether it's their weirdo stuff or not. There are a lot of good people in the world who have bad reputations because of BS laws. The amount of money used in our judicial system to lock up all of those people who were mentally disabled, physically disabled, veterans, mothers, other victims, most of whom grew up in the foster care system. You should look these numbers up. I mean, that's a hell of a workforce. Most of them want to do good for the world. They don't want the things that happen to them happening to others. Foster kids and former foster kids are an excellent source of knowledge. I found this to be pretty universal. Does that mean everybody's like that? No. With a place to work, a place to put our hats, teaching that stuff to the rest of the world would be pretty easy now, wouldn't it? And there are a lot of us. But we're still a very tiny portion of the population. In Boulder County, homeless people get locked up at a 346-to-1 ratio over their housed counterparts. That's because of the criminalization of homelessness, every aspect, whatever excuse they can get to take you out of the public eye so nobody sees you. You spend all that money, a lot more money than they should, and then they're cheapskates, so it doesn't all go where it should. The people who are running it, managing it, all the way down to the lowest ranks, are, for the most part, unfit to do their jobs. We all know good people. You know who the good people are in your neighborhood, the people who are not going to go wrong. This whole campaigning stuff, I don't think that's right. Like here in Chapel, Nebraska, for Dual County Sheriff, I think that we should, everybody come together at the city meeting hall and start volunteering who you think would be best for the job. But that's not something that matters. In the grand scheme of things, the ultimate goal here is to save the children. And if you guys aren't down with that, you're out of your minds. A lot of these people who are mad at me are parents, and a lot of them are afraid of having their kids took. And there's a reason they're afraid of having their kids took. I've been speaking out about the police and their involvement in Boulder, Colorado for a lot of years. And a lot of other people have too. And somebody needs to talk to those people. Somebody higher up. I'm trying to force them to do their jobs. Obviously, I'm not doing a great job. The problem is, when I was trying to do things legally, I was barred at every step. And now it's the same. I mean, I'm doing the best I can, but I shouldn't have needed all this money. And I get it, over the amount of time that it's been, it's not a lot of money. It's less than my disability payments would have been. But y'all need to understand that when somebody needs to go in who is easily overwhelmed, they're having a mental breakdown, and they're in need of a police officer, that police officer needs to be patient with them and listen. And also for me, like when you ask me a question, you might need to give me a minute. I have to stop a bunch of current trains of thought and go searching for the memory you're after in specific. And then I have to think about it. Even then, sometimes my words don't come together right. But I also am trying not to stutter at that point in time. I got Tourette syndrome, so I do this with my wrists. Not usually at my chest, it's usually by my hip. Sometimes I do this with my eyes, especially when I'm nervous. The thing is, if people are gonna be cruel to you, somebody needs to stand up to them. And we do need to work on safety in numbers. I mean, all the way down to going to school, you need to have somebody with you. We need to make sure the kids are safe, but we also need to make sure who it is who's keeping an eye on them. And obviously CPS has done a terrible job. The FBI ain't doing that great of a job. The police forces are doing a shitty job. We have the technology to prevent people from, not entirely, but for the most part, prevent people from doing those terrible things most of us grew up with. Sometimes you just need to listen to people. Sometimes you just need to separate them for a bit. But then we say, whose business is it to do that? Whose job is it to do that? Well, that was the job of CPS. A lot of times there were broke families, couldn't take care of their kids. And those kids were taken by CPS and sold to rich families and middle-class families, and it costs a lot of money to buy a kid. Capitalism. Anyone who is incarcerated can be used as a slave, according to the 13th Amendment. So there's two things right there. It doesn't take much to be good to people. People will be a lot happier and like you a lot more if you're sending food instead of bombs. Well, it's not our job to feed them, it's not our job to kill them either then. What do you call that? Oh, they got lots of oil, but they got no food. Or they got a lot of another resource we want, and they got no food. Or they're in the middle of a drought and they ain't got no food. Now, we've seen what happens to those food carts. And a lot of airdrops in a lot of areas, but we can drop a lot more food now. We have a lot more of that capability. Our military heavy lift helicopters can bring in a lot more food. And if we can help sustain the population and get these technologies in place, we could literally reverse all of the issues that we're having with our planet within a decade. That means 10 years. In 10 years, we could change the whole planet.